Hello everybody, it's George from Ireland. Welcome back to the channel. This video is about the budget was announced just yesterday, Wednesday, by the Chancellor Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, as she would never tire of reminding you she is the first woman to hold that office. Well, it'll be a very easy act to follow for the next female Chancellor Exchequer because she's been a disaster. It was not an entirely easy situation to take over, but she managed to make it a lot worse. A lot worse. The 22 billion pound black hole. If it was so urgent to sort this out, why did Labour wait almost 4 months to do so? The data was all publicly available. There's Freedom of Information Act. It must be shared with the opposition, and it is. This 22 billion pound black hole is a lie. Now, admittedly, a lot of politicians lie about this. George Osborne, when he was Chancellor Exchequer, he used to lie by claiming that something was defence spending when actually it was out of another budget. But they're always playing smoke and mirrors. Just because Conservatives lie doesn't make it permissible for Labour politicians to lie either. I mean, sadly, most politicians lie, and the more they lie, the more they get ahead, and we reward them for lying. In that sense, we get the politicians we deserve. We don't reward the ones who tell the truth. I mean, the Green Party, I revile them, but I think they are honest. Anyway, go on to this budget. So it's the first time that Labour's actually issued a budget since 2010. Of course, that wasn't the main budget because they lost office in May or June that year. So going to be 40 billion pound spending rise to help various public services, and Labour would really underscore this is about the National Health Service, and part of that is true, of course. They're raising the doctors' salaries. Is it 5.5%? They offer the nurses a similar pay rise. The doctors have accepted it, end the junior doctor strikes. For now, the nurses haven't accepted it, so Labour's not tried to negotiate them for a while. After all these big pay rises, the nurses might perceive, well, there really is no more money in the kitty. We're better just settle for it because we're not going to get more than that. So certain rates are not going up. For example, national insurance paid by employees is not what employers is. Value added tax is not going to be changed either. But things like the income tax band thresholds are going to rise with inflation, but that's only after 2028, because otherwise more people would go into the higher bands, because the first £12,000 or so is your personal allowance. That's tax free. You earn up to whatever £30,000 at a certain rate. Anything between 30 and 40,000 quid is another higher rate. I don't remember the exact bands. If you're running over 100 grand, they take away the personal allowance, and the rates are up to, is it 48%, something extortionate like that. So disincentives to the dynamic. And it's just ordinary people like me. We have to subsidize the bone idle, those who refuse to work, pretend to be mentally or physically disabled. Some of them are, but they're mentally and physically disabled people who work full time. They're people with only one hand who work full time. They're blind people who work full time. There are deaf people who work full time. There are people with depression who work full time. There are wheelchair bound people who work full time. There are people with prosthetic limbs who work full time. All sorts of people work full time, and mostly there is no excuse for it. And they're scroungers, they're layabouts, they're malingerers, and they are just parasitical. And the Conservative government was appalling in not sorting this out. I know there were some attempts on Ian Duncan-Smith. Of course, a few mistakes were made. Some people were told to work and they had their benefits cut when that shouldn't have happened. And of course, but very often the case is the other way around. People this sick note culture saying I'm too depressed to work. So if you slob around the house, guess what? It's a bit dispiriting. So just have be no option to work. We wouldn't have tolerated this a couple of generations. Get out to work. You'll work or you'll starve. That's it. It's like Maggie Thatcher said, those who do not work shall not eat, because there's a heavier and heavier burden on working people like me to pay for those who refuse to work. More and more people staying in education longer and longer. And another thing, to add insult to injury, happened to got the council tax bill today. And the county council tax going up 3%. That's above inflation. Inflation busting. Again, adult social care going up 2%. Well, it should be going down. I mean, we should raise the retirement age. And then some of the people who supposedly need social care are just slobs. Fuck them. Anyway, the local borough council up's 3%. The police is up 4.2%, who are just there to enforce a far left ideology and not actually tackle crime, and so on. So it's yes, more injustice. That's the real exploitation. Anyway, the basic rate for capital gains tax on profit from selling in your shares, for example, that's going up from 10% to 18%. And then the higher rate, that'll go up all the way to 24%. It's currently 20%. If you sell extra profit on that, there's no change in the tax rate on that one. Inheritance tax thresholds are going to be delayed to 2030, and anything from unspent pension pots also subject to tax from 2027. This is the only bit I disagree with. I think actually wasn't redistributive enough, because if you inherit wealth, fine, lovely for you, but you didn't earn that. So you actually don't deserve that. I mean, it's not wrong for your parents to give you something, but I would tax that very heavily indeed. Parents can give it to you whilst they're alive or spend it themselves, stimulate the economy now by spending it. That's why, think about the people who inherit nothing. Anyway, national insurance, they're going to have to pay that 15% on salaries above £5,000. That's going to kick in April 2025, the beginning of financial year. 13.8% on salaries over £9,000, which they all are. That's meant to raise £25 billion a year. Of course, we're never quite sure exactly how many people are going to be working, or how many people are going to be, how much they're going to be earning. So these have got to be estimates. They can't be exact. The employment allowance, smaller companies are allowed to reduce their liability from 5,000 to 10,500 pounds, because otherwise they just couldn't function. So tax paid by private equity managers on their share profits, if their deals go well, that's rising from 28% to 32%. So taxing businesses, and the rate of corporation tax paid by businesses over £250,000, that's going to be frozen at 25% to the next election. The next election is not necessarily 4.5 years away, could be sooner than that. So the minimum wage for people over 21 is going up from £11.44 to £12 21. I mean, I think that's fine, because it's difficult enough to live on even a medium salary. I shudder to think what it would be like on minimum wage. And for people 18 to 20, going from £8.60 to 10, that's about sensible. And there's a new basic and state pension payments are going to go up to 4.1%, because the triple lock, more than working age benefits, the pension is linked to inflation, and I can't remember average salary and something else. So being able to get allowance for a full-time carer, that's going up from £151 to 195, the threshold, because you can have some other outside earnings. Okay, so fuel duty on petrol and diesel is going to remain till April 2025. Okay, that was cut. So that was a good thing, because people need to use their cars. The cap on single bus fares, this is for England only, not the whole UK, is going up to £3, except for in Manchester and Greater London. So that'll help fund public transport, but then that's hard on low paid workers. And it's the blue collar workers who have to go in person. White collar workers, bankers, solicitors, barristers, a lot of these people, IT engineers, a lot of these people can do their work from home remotely. It's the low paid, the shop assistants, the cleaners, the farm workers, the factory workers. They have to be there in person, the care assistants. And so they're the ones who get hammered by having to pay for public transport. So anyway, this is going to supposedly help pay for the high-speed 2 rail to go all the way to Euston Station in central London. That was in doubt up until now. And anyway, the government says the Trans-Pennine Rail line between York and Manchester will go ahead. Some people thought it would be axed. So the air passenger duty, that's a tax, is going up by £2 for short haul flights. I don't know how short haul that is for economy. £12 for long haul ones. I don't know how long it has before it's long haul. Private jets go up by 50%. Well, I agree with that. This is all discretionary spending. So £500 a year to pay for potholes to be fixed in South Britain, and then the double excise duty paid by car owners, unless you have a very petrol efficient engine. The idea is that people will be taxed for dirty energy and then move to electric vehicles. So there's a new flat tax of £2.20 per 10 millimeters of vaping, to discourage vaping, and 2% above inflation tax rise on tobacco, 10% if it's hand rolled tobacco. I'm not sure why hand rolled tobacco is going to be taxed more heavily. Um, so they haven't said this. They said they're considering more tax on sugar in drinks, and indeed dairy products. Wow, you see, that really is health freakery. I might tax beef because it's so polluting, as well as not particularly healthy. As it raised the tax on beef, is already taxed. Okay, so they're meant to raise spending on education and the NHS by 4.7%, defence spending to rise by 2.9 billion next year, but people say that's actually already been spent. And the Home Office budget's been cut 3.1% and 3.3% in the next year, and because they're presuming they're going to save from asylum. Well, they're not going to save for asylum, because more people are arriving illegally all the time, more than ever before. There's going to be 1.3 billion extra funding for local councils. Okay, they'll be able to keep all the money from the right to buy sales and so on. A lot of things about social housing. So a lot more spending, a lot more borrowing, changing the fiscal rules on that. It's irresponsible. It's unjust. It's terrible. It's really old Labour. It's not entirely unexpected. They trailed it very heavily, so I suppose the reaction is not as furious as it ought to be, and that the markets could price that in. So markets haven't reacted that badly that the pound has fallen a bit. But yeah, it's terrible. It's unfair. I'm going to be paid. I'm going to have to pay more tax than before. The sweat of my brow, my stress, my time is going to go to those who don't deserve it, who refuse to make a contribution to society, even more than is already the case. Some of the spending is sensible and I approve of. We could cut things, we could cut arts grants, we could cut university places, I would do. A lot of it, we cut money to the royal family. We could do that. We could have no overseas age budget. We don't need so many civil servants. They're not demanding any more efficiency out of the NHS or the civil service or anyone, despite all the extra money spent on them. Yeah, that's it. So it's deeply depressing, but I'm afraid entirely unsurprising. Thank you so much, and vote against Labour. Goodbye.